Hey, all our fans of the Innova802 podcast. Your co-host Scott Graves here, and with me in the virtual studio tonight, we have my co-host Will Jeffries. Shout out from the greater Burlington area. How are you doing, Will?
Really well. How about yourself, Scott? It was nice seeing you this past week at the VTTA event in person too.
Oh my, yeah. You know what? We don't, Innova802 listeners, we don't get to see each other in the flesh very often. And all of a sudden we found ourselves all at the same place in South Burlington to celebrate our sponsor, the Vermont Technology Alliance's, the transition, the first of its kind transition for the VTTA from founding executive director Jeff Kuchar, who's retiring after what, like 25 years or something like that, I think. Yeah, 25 years.
You see, a sign of success for an organization is if you can make that kind of transition from an original founder or an executive director into new hands. I mean, that to me is a sign of sustainability in an organization. It's not just carried by one personality.
Exactly. And so they made that transition, and Thursday night was a celebration, and that was pretty awesome. And we got to see each other and converse and talk with other people. So that was really good.
It was a treat to have all of us there.
It was an adventure, and it was a treat to have all of us there. Ryan Munn, our other co-host, should be joining us soon. But without further ado, our guest right now is Henrik Van Tassel, who is... he's got a whole bunch of things going on. He's going to talk to us about some of the current open source projects that are taking shape at UVM. And I'm going to let him tell us a little bit about some of his other affiliations too, including the Vermont Complex Systems Institute. He's a student at UVM, and we're really happy to have him here to talk about what's going on over there. Henrik, how you doing, man?
I'm very good. Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
So let's dive right in. Tell us about some of the current projects you're working on, and maybe later we'll talk about last semester's projects too. But we should also mention the work you're doing is affiliated with the program that our prior guest in season 2, Kendall Fortney, is part of that program, correct?
Yes. So he is actually my boss. So just to give the general rundown, so I'm a sophomore at UVM, studying computer science. I do a lot of things here, but specifically within Verso, I am the team lead for the Rapid Innovation and Prototyping Pod. In this case, so this is a new project team, but basically it's a fun little hierarchy, because we have, you start at the top with UVM overall, and then recently the Vermont Complex Systems Institute went from the Complex Systems Center to its own institute, and that was the result of a board of trustees meeting last semester. But so Verso, the Vermont Open Source Project Office, sits within the Complex Systems Institute, and then under that we have ORCA, which is the Open Research Community Accelerator, and then within that is Rapid Innovation and Prototyping. So that's to give an idea of the full kind of top-down structure where we are.
Awesome. What kind of solutions, what kind of change the world solutions are you working on right now?
So the main reason why RIP exists, it's a new initiative so Kendall kind of came up with this idea, and I started within Verso last summer as a technical specialist. And within Verso specialists, we have technical specialists, community specialists. Usually there's most time one of each. We have data specialists, and these are people who are students who are particularly passionate or skilled in or a specific area, and then they jump around to each of the different pods or projects, because one project doesn't necessarily need a data person all the time. So it's easier to just have one person who can kind of lend help with a specific area when needed. So I would pick up some slack here and there, or develop internal tooling or documentation. And so Kendall kind of came to me, gave me the opportunity, and said, like, this is the general premise behind RIP, which is there's a big list of ideas. And those come from, different community leaders or certain people, typically in like nonprofits and government spaces, that might come to Kendall, or Kendall goes to them and says, like, what can we do? What sort of open data or open source software solution can we do that might fix a common problem that you have? So one of the projects that's like getting close to wrapping up now is the Vermont livability map, which is kind of a combination of two different pods that have been happening, which is the Vermont Zoning Atlas, which digitized all the zoning data in the state of Vermont in one map where you can go in and see all the different regulations and attributes. So that's currently getting developed. And then there's another one, which is the wastewater. I forget what the exact name is, but it's like the wastewater mapping pod. And so they're doing something similar. They contact all the towns and boroughs and the counties and get their maps of what wastewater infrastructure there is and isn't, and turn that into a digital format. And this is all in pursuit of making it easier to develop housing in this state, as we know, which has a very intense housing crisis. So RIP specifically, the idea though is when you have all these ideas, it typically takes a while where we're all funded by grant money, which sometimes comes from the state, it comes from nonprofits, all sorts of different places. But
what's interesting, by the way, I don't mean to interrupt you, but all of this is really great, and I'm surprised that more of the funding for you guys doesn't come from private industry. In other words, I feel like most open source student groups like this one that morph into program, much larger institutes in and of themselves, or a combination of the two, it's fertile ground for solutions that are constantly being worked up. And almost all of those solutions, I feel like they're helping a specific segment of the industry or a segment of the population. And you just gave a great example, by the way, but not least of which is because I'm a developer. So this is a cool thing. And in an age of AI, where AI can scrape that information that much easier, when people are looking at things from a state level or a full regional level or international level, it's a really great project, right? But, like there isn't more private money saying, oh, this is an interesting way to, to get some research done on the cheap, but get good research done because you guys are doing good work.
Yeah. Open source project offices are kind of springing up all around, but I'm not quite sure they're as prevalent yet to attract a lot of private industry. But yeah, basically the idea behind RIP is you have all these projects, and there's I can't list them all because they're kind of kept under wraps until they're more developed. But there's like 20 plus ideas that come from various different groups. And whenever the Kendall is kind of looking to expand things, it becomes a process where someone has to go out and talk to these people, figure out like what is something feasible that students can develop. What are we actually looking to do as opposed to like this higher level idea? And then it has to go and get worked into grant applications to actually fund the students to develop that sort of thing. And that takes months. And that's just for one project. And so the idea with what RIP is doing is we're saying, hey, what if we, with some extra funding, we go around and we take these ideas and we focus on them for 2 weeks or 4 weeks and just see like, first of all, we have technical skills so we can develop some prototypes. We can also just do a lot of that ideation. And then once at the end of that, we may not have a fully working solution or even kind of a prototype solution because we generally don't do back-end work. But we do have something that is much easier to apply for grants because now instead of just written documents and whatnot, you can send in screenshots and you can say like, this is what we actually found when we tried to start implementing this.
I'm wondering just how novel that is within academia, that the way you're doing it,
Yeah, it's not something that I've not looked into this concept elsewhere. I'm not sure how present it is elsewhere, but and the other kind of important flip side of it too is like it allows us to really prove the viability of something. Like by working on it, we figure out too, is this something that's even possible for students to do? And then if it isn't, then we can say this is something else that we do know is viable that should be focused on, and then that way you save a lot of that time where that would have been spent on a project that would have otherwise possibly had issues.
Quality, not just quantity of projects, right?
It's almost like investing in that due diligence, like a pre-seed level due diligence around the idea. Let's invest a little bit of time and effort here and see if there's something viable, or maybe it leads to something else.
Yeah, and I'd imagine too. Another measure is just what kind of a value to the students is there in a particular project, right?
Yeah. The other, and that kind of allows me to segue to another kind of really cool part about what we're doing, just within Verso as a whole, within Orca, and to some extent, especially within RIP, which is that this is also a big way for students to gain experience in working with teams, doing like software development with other people. And that's one of Kendall's main goals with this program, is allowing students to graduate with that experience of working in teams and kind of working collaboratively.
If you take everything that you've described so far about what you guys are doing, it sounds like if you're a student that's working your way through these different teams that are the pods that are working on projects over time, it's really giving you a lot of good team oriented experience of what it's likely to be after you start your career, post your academic career.
Yeah, that's one of the main reasons why I'm why I've been just grateful for the opportunity, even without RIP, but just the opportunity to work within Verso. Is UVM CS program is just small because it's just not one of the main focuses. I think they are trying to grow it a little bit, but we're not a CS school in the way that like an MIT is, or an MIT or a Stanford is. And so this is I'm kind of proud to be a part of the program, and proud to help with it, because this is really how we're doing as much as we can to introduce students to teamwork and to common industry practices that make students much more hireable when they graduate.
And that can be an interesting, being a bigger fish in a smaller pond at a school situation like you just described can sometimes be good. Two reasons I can think of. One, each student, the program itself is more reliant on each student taking much more of a leading role much earlier in their careers, right? As far as project-oriented work goes. And secondly, the chances increase that you might get access to a lot more multidisciplinary exposure, right? And working with people in other disciplines or other academic tracks.
That is definitely one thing. We do have more people this semester who are not strictly in CS. I know one of the people in my team is a math major with an interest in CS. And we also have people who are more like focused on other aspects of engineering. But kind of your point on leadership also brings me to another point, which is the room that I'm sitting in right now. There's a flag. It's right there.
We can see it right there. CS crew.
So, yes. So CS crew, or computer science crew, is one of the computer science clubs here at UVM. The other one is right next, or the flag for the other one is right next to me, but which is the Society for Women in Computer Science. And I am the vice president of CS crew. And so that is one of the other things, is kind of, I'm playing all the sides here. Just trying to do what we can. So the kind of like chief events, last semester, every fall, UVM is the CS Fair, which is a large presentation. Anyone who is a CS major or a CS minor who has taken a CS class that semester can enter a project, and there's a whole bunch of different categories, from around like kind of website development and app development, machine learning. And there are sort of, as judges go around, judges that are former students, professors, community leaders, and there are cash prizes, and it's a great kind of showcase because everyone comes out, has some pizza, checks out these awesome projects, and it is primarily put together by our sibling club, which is the Society for Women in Computer Science. And the main event that we're putting together for this semester is UVM's second annual hackathon, which was started by the previous leaders of this club last year. UVM had hackathons in the past, but they didn't necessarily survive the pandemic. But we have that coming up right at the end of February, and we're actually doing collaboration with Grossman, the business school here. So it's sort of a mixed, both kind of combining computer science majors and business majors into a sort of mixed like team development environment, and they get a sort of miniature case competition out of it. So we're really excited for that as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. When you discover, new exciting projects to work on together too, that way,
Scott just reminded me actually about I'm in the Generator Vermont Makerspace, and your question about manufacturing and open source, actually something newer that has a very direct applicability. If anyone's familiar with Prusa brand 3D printers, this is actually a printer that is open source. So the parts themselves are open sourced with the community. You can make them, you can actually print them on the printer itself. Many of the parts for the printer can be made by the printer. And more than that is there's this become an entire online community of users who are developing, sharing changes, modifications, additions that you can make on this printer to adjust, change, swap out parts on your own Prusa printer. And that's become a vibrant community that's kind of at the intersection of where open source is meeting that physical manufacturing. So if anyone is interested in learning more about that, it's Prusa, Prusa, and Generator Vermont has a whole bank of them right here.
Cool. Right up there in Burlington, right on the waterfront, no less, next to Hula.
Right here. Good
Our
news.
third co-host has entered the building, the virtual building. Ryan Munn, how you doing?
Doing well, thanks. So trying to stay quiet for a minute, let Henrik talk. Nice to meet you, Heinrich.
Nice to meet you.
And speaking of Prusa, actually the Vermont Manufacturing Extension Center has a Prusa in a box that people can loan out. And I have done so, played around with both my kids, coming up with designs, altering designs, printing stuff out, made some gifts for family, some earrings, things like that, just having some fun with it.
This is what I'm talking about. It's like one step closer to actually realizing the Borg from Star Trek. The machines can actually replicate and improve themselves just over and over and over again. And it's open source.
I saw a presentation actually up at Burlington maybe 2 years back at something, I don't think the event goes on anymore, but it went for a few years, called Synaptic Super Collider. It was all about bringing tech and art together. They even had, some like collaborative, like live collaborative productions of music produced with the audience. One of the presenters there was out of Austin, Texas, and he was a young kid actually when he got started, with I believe as a Prusa, doing exactly described, printing off parts, making modifications, and he started YouTubing. And got pretty popular with his YouTube, talking about his experimentation. And he has since raised like $10 million and started a business basically for the purpose of creating full-on containerized manufacturing units. So the idea that you could come up with essentially all the components and transitions between different types of printing different materials to say, okay, this container can produce this array of full final parts, even to the point of looking at how can we be printing circuitry and things like that. So pretty fascinating if you think about where we can go with this. And there's been some people like Jacques Fresco historically that had been thinking about these things long before we had the tech, and was envisioning this idea of 3D printing housing and cities, really designed from the center in to be balanced circular structures that are, sort of organically built and manufactured by themselves.
Make this self-replicating line to one more extension into the future, which is, if anyone's ever heard of von Neumann probes, the idea of sending out a self-replicating spacecraft that is essentially 3D printing and able to 3D print iterations of itself from material that it could find. And this concept predated 3D printers. And then, I believe, check me on that, but then the technology has now been advancing to the point that actually seems feasible, possibly in the immediate, if not in the next few years. And if you really want to have a fun exploration of that concept, there's actually an entire sci-fi book series based around the idea of a von Neumann probe. And you get to follow this guy who's been essentially frozen, and then his brain was translated into a computer and put into a von Neumann probe and shot into space. And so the book series just follows his adventures through multiple generations and iterations of these von Neumann probes throughout the universe. It's a fun romp if you want something light sci-fi, but a fun exploration of the concept taken to its extreme.
Pretty awesome, and probably multiple podcasts coming up in the future for the Innova802. Henrik, let's talk about you for a minute. What any sort of what for you personally? What's your real focus, right? Like, what really, gets your blood boiling in this space, and what are some of the things before you end school that you really want to specifically work on? Are you bringing specific project ideas to the table that you'd like to accomplish?
I mostly just like making things for the public good. It's part of the reason why I like open source, just making things that people can use, ideally at limited or no cost, and that just solve real problems for people. And that's the reason why I'm really sticking around Verso, and taking on these new initiatives. Yeah, I really just like open source, public good stuff. And also just gaining industry experience.
Another question. Go ahead, Ryan.
I was going to say, is there anything you've made that or designed that you've kind of seen go into use, any kind of, sort of story of the design that has been able to be utilized or has maybe inspired some other designs or devices?
I haven't had the opportunity to be quite that influential yet, but I'm hoping to change that in the future. And that is also kind of why I'm getting involved with the CS club scene here, is trying to make a community where we're not just having meetings in a little room in Innovation Hall every so often, but really doing like projects. And yeah, that's one of my future goals with running the club, just doing more projects, seeing like, can we maybe take this team experience thing and take it outside of just doing, getting students through the hiring process and do that, because that's obviously limited because we can't just hire everybody. And not everyone in the CS club necessarily wants a job or wants that job. So it's like, what if we can just do projects and we can build the club website all together, or we can all make games together or some other useful tool.
Hone your skills, right? That's what school's all about too. Like spending every waking moment in an environment where you can learn and you can make mistakes and there's little to no consequence, and that's how you learn. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, being an advocate of open source and wanting to work on as you've sort of self-defined on projects that truly help people and that are good for the marketplace. What are your thoughts on the recent AI version come out of China last week?
So for full transparency, AI is not something that I focus on primarily, partially just because I feel like there's a lot of hype and people just trying to put it in places that it shouldn't be. But in general, I think that it doesn't really necessarily matter what country it comes from, but I think that DeepSeek is overall a positive thing, even if it causes a scramble at Meta and OpenAI and various other companies, because I think the best future for technology like AI that has, of course, in this case, we're just talking about large language models, but in general, I think that the best possible outcome is this technology being open. And at the same time, you still have to acknowledge that there is that barrier to entry where you have to be able to have the capital to purchase large quantities of GPUs to be able to run these things at any larger scale or have response times that are usable. But I think that it would be a mistake to try and force it such that the most groundbreaking developments are kind of behind lock and key. because I think that's part of the reason why I'm also just such a big fan of open source software is you don't end up, when something's open source and it is freely licensed, you're not duplicating efforts. People aren't spending their time reinventing the wheel. They can say, someone already has made this thing and we know why it works, and how they made it work because we have the history of what code they wrote, to make it work. And now we can spend our time making it better. And I think that's the power of having those things open source, and like AI training parameters and, all that sort of stuff is now someone can take DeepSeek and they can go, well, this is open and we know how it was made. So how can we make it even more powerful?
Find Innova802 on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and subscribe to Interchain Live on YouTube for video podcasts. Innova802 is a collaboration of Interchain Live and M the Media Project.